Welcome to Trial Site News podcast series. Today we have David Solomon, CEO of Paris-based Pharnext. Now, Pharnext is an advanced clinical stage biopharmaceutical company developing novel first-in-class therapies for orphan and common diseases with high unmet medical needs, leveraging their artificial intelligence-based pliotherapy platform. Now, Dr. Solomon is a 30-year life science industry vet, and we'll be discussing with him, among other things, a fascinating PXT3003 trial, which deals with Charcot Marie-Tooth disease, a terrible hereditary disorder that damages the nerves in arms and legs. It's a degenerative nerve disease that usually appears in adolescence or early adulthood. So, Dr. Solomon, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you here. So, Dr. Solomon, before we get into the Pharnext investigational products and specific clinical trials, can you introduce to the Trial Site News audience to Pharnext? When was it founded? Where is it from? And what is its core focus?
Yeah, thank you. So Pharnext was founded in 2007 by a group of scientists that had a lot of insights into both genetics and also the concept of pliotherapy or polypharmacology. And the concept was based on the idea that for genetic-based diseases, sometimes the therapy can involve modulating different pathways that are perturbed pathologically that give rise to disease and the disease state. And so the concept here was that medicines in combination will perform novel and unexpected and unanticipated results when used in combination to modify different pathways. And so Daniel Cohn, among other founders, the earlier CEO of the company, had this idea and utilized it to derive several medicines, among them PXT3003, that is under investigation for Charcot Marie-Tooth disease.
Now, for those that may not know, Daniel Cohen is a famous pioneer in modern genomics. Can you share more about his participation in the company?
Well, as one of the founders and as the former CEO, Daniel's instrumental in the first generation of the company in sort of forming the foundation of our platform and successfully getting the company listed on Euronext in Paris and raising significant monies for the company and bringing on good investors to the company. And he currently serves an important role as chairman of our scientific advisory board.
Now, big data and AI are all the rage today. With powerful potential, can you introduce to the Trial Site News audience, at the core, how is Pharnext drugs candidates developed using AI-enabled big data?
What we do is we start with a disease or an indication, and we build around that genetic data, GWAS data, and also utilize big data to think about what genes and what signal transduction pathways are aberrant in that disease state or in that indication. And then around that, we think about which combinations of either existing medicines or new chemical entities can perturb those different genetic anomalies downstream or different biochemical pathways in combination that might bring unexpected and unanticipated results in terms of the treatment of the disease. The next thing the company then does is look at different biomarkers of the disease that are key indicators of disease, either progression or betterment, and see whether the combination of medicines in the right ratios can actually modulate or modify those markers. And so that's what we've done in Charcot Marie-Tooth, also in Alzheimer's disease with another medicine called 864. And that's the beginning of the discovery process that brings novel and unexpected combination medicines, as we say, pliotherapies, to investigational use. That's what we've done in Charcot Marie-Tooth, and that's why we have derived a medicine called PXT3003 that we think is very effective in the disease.
So let's talk more about PTX3003. Obviously, Charcot Marie-Tooth is a disease type 1A. Can you share with the audience more about this disease? What are the attributes and distribution of the disease, and if there are any current treatments?
Sure. So this disease is called an ascending peripheral neuropathy. This is a neurologic disease of the peripheral nerves, where in Charcot Marie-Tooth 1A, the most common form of the disease that represents about 50% of the incidence and prevalence of Charcot Marie-Tooth worldwide, there's a duplication of a gene called PMP22. And with the duplication of that gene, that is a key myelin protein encoding gene, you get disturbances in the transmission along axons between the brain and, say, a muscle end plate. So think about the myelin sheath as like the insulation around an electric wire. When the insulation is there and it's working properly, you plug in a light bulb and the light bulb goes on perfectly. But when the insulation is damaged or frayed, as you know, and if you plug in the electric wire, the light bulb might start to flicker. And that's exactly what happens to muscles when the myelin sheath is damaged. The muscles don't contract properly. You get atrophy or wasting of muscles. You get muscle weakness. You have sensory problems in terms of the return along the dendrite. And so these patients first start to feel a lot of peripheral symptoms and signs and experience peripheral signs in early adolescence to adulthood. And that it undergoes a progression in a very archetypal way that is well described, well defined, that leads many patients with Charcot Marie-Tooth to be rather disabled, including many that end up in wheelchairs. There is no existing therapy for CMT1A, and so this will be, I think, a breakthrough insofar as our medicine, we believe, can stabilize or better the clinical status of patients with CMT1A. And so we're very excited to have already conducted successful phase 2 studies, promising earlier phase 3 studies, and now we're embarking on pivotal phase 3 studies according to feedback from the FDA towards a filing and an approval with the FDA that we expect to achieve during the year 23-24.
Now, can you share more about this clinical trial, the PXT3003, and how a recent manufacturing issue led to the development of new insights about your work ongoing?
Sure. So earlier, the company carried out a phase 3 study. And while the study has shown exciting and promising phase 3 results, not only including safety and tolerability, but also in terms of some efficacy, there was an issue in manufacturing where a small amount of crystals were seen in the high dose arm of the trial. We've addressed that directly and fixed it, because it happens that there was the high dose, there was also a lower dose that is half the dose of the high dose, and the low dose medicine never had any crystal structure problems. We've now manufactured 25 batches of the low dose over the past 2+ years. And so what we've decided to use is, in fact, just twice the volume of the low dose, which equals the high dose. In our new clinical study, we've communicated this with FDA and received feedback from FDA. So in fact, this is the way we're going to be conducting our new clinical study, where the FDA is asking us in particular for studying the high dose against placebo. So we'll do so again in oral dosage form in individual liquid sachets that are called stick packs, and patients will be taking 10 milliliters twice a day of our medicine. And so those are the plans as sanctioned by the FDA, and we're excited to begin first patient, first dose of this pivotal clinical trial within the first quarter of 2021 coming up.
So we also know that you met with regulators this year to discuss a commercial path to PXT3003. Could you share what your estimated timeline is to approval, and what risks you face, and if you're successful, what kind of market exists for this product?
So we've communicated with the FDA extensively. As you know, we not only have orphan status, but also fast track status with the FDA. And we submitted a Type C briefing package earlier in 2020 and received feedback from the FDA as we press released in April of 2020. And that feedback basically gave us a very defined path to NDA submission and then approval for our medicine, PXT3003, for the treatment of Charcot Marie-Tooth. And that includes not only the pivotal phase 3 study that I've described to you, but also a pivotal combinatorial study in the disease animal model that we'll likely conduct at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, a renowned research institute where we've already done combination studies in the disease model, the model that they actually discovered at the Max Planck under the leadership of Professor Michael Serreta. The clinical trial that I've mentioned, the high dose versus placebo trial, will be in 350 patients. It will begin, as I said, before the end of Q1 2021. And we fully intend to enroll all patients within the first 12 months of starting the trial. And then the patients will all experience a period of 15 months, either on medicine or on placebo, before the trial concludes. And then it's just a matter of gathering the data, analyzing the data, disclosing the top line data, submitting it in the proper package to FDA, and awaiting FDA feedback. So that's the process that we will follow. I can't, with an exactitude, disclose what the date of submission to FDA will be, but we're confident that we can enroll these patients in the first 12 months, and then it's an in-life phase of about 15 months. So we're excited to begin this study. We think it will provide the first known therapy for CMT1A, and we're also very close to a lot of patient groups, and they're very excited for this medicine, as we know our patients, investigators, and their families as well.
Now, I would like to go back to big data and AI. How do you plan on leveraging these technologies to discover and develop new drug combinations? We know it's led to a product to treat a CMT1A. Can you elaborate on CMT1A for our audience?
Sure. So in CMT1A, as you know, we've used our platform ultimately to derive a medicine, PXT3003. We're very keen in the background to also develop new medicines for other diseases. I mean, this is akin to NASA in 1969 focusing exclusively in the public eye to landing an astronaut on the moon, as they successfully did in July of 1969. In the background, of course, we all now know that they were also developing the space shuttle. And while that wasn't what was discussed by Walter Cronkite on national TV in July of 1969, that was the main activity behind the moon project for NASA. And it's the same for our company. We are focused on PXT3003 and getting an approval in Charcot Marie-Tooth, but at the same time, we're very keen on utilizing the platform to discover new combination medicines to treat hard to treat diseases where there's no known therapies. And so I can't disclose what those medicines are, nor those diseases today, but it is the topic of many of our scientists inside Pharnext, and will be the topic of further disclosures from Pharnext going forward.
Now, Dr. Solomon, we live in extraordinary times. Could you share with the audience, which includes many trial site investigators, pharmaceutical executives, investors, and patients interested in learning more about new treatments, the various trends that you are seeing in the biopharma industry ongoing during this particularly unusual time?
Well, I think the greatest trend is the rapidity that vaccines, different types of vaccines, have been developed against COVID. This is not only a global pandemic, and a crisis, but it's also a health tragedy, really, when you count up the number of people that have succumbed to COVID, not only in the US, but also globally. So I think one trend is to highlight how biotech and pharma has in fact been the solution through this crisis. The speed and the dedication of so many scientists, healthcare providers, to not only the treatment of this disease, but discovering and advancing vaccines that we believe will be important and successful in halting this pandemic, this crisis, has been astounding, really. And hats off to all those who've been doing that. It also highlights, in fact, that this is what biotech does. So whether it's the treatment of COVID or the treatment of other diseases, Charcot Marie-Tooth, difficult to treat cancers, or other chronic diseases, biotech is dedicated to finding new and innovative medicines to treat those diseases. So this has shed, I think, a spotlight on what biotech can do in terms of healthcare and healthcare innovation, and it's something that we should all applaud. Meanwhile, of course, we face challenges. Clinical trials are harder to conduct in the COVID period because patients obviously can't access trial sites properly. It might be more difficult in terms of supply chain, in terms of endpoints. And so trialists, physicians, ClinOps teams, patients have to be a lot more inventive and patient in mounting our clinical trials to get new medicines approved. And that is something we all face. So we have to be clever. We have to think about endpoints that can be done remotely. We have to think about new paradigms in our clinical trials. And also the FDA has to be congratulated because despite this COVID crisis, they've been equally responsive to not only obviously the COVID pandemic, but also many companies still trying to advance their proprietary medicines. So a very complex ecosystem, but I think everyone is rising to the challenge. And I think the general public can also see the dedication of all of us in healthcare and biotech.
So let's shift gears again. I want to talk about your company now. Your company trades at about 5.6 right now with a market cap of roughly about 75 million. Can you share, for the business execution standpoint, what do you plan on doing in 2021 to raise the share price for investors?
Well, the share price ultimately always is responsive to two things: results and deals. And I've shared with you a bit about our horizon and thoughts, timelines for results for PXT3003 and Charcot Marie-Tooth.
Yes.
In terms of deals, we have disclosed in a shareholder letter that came from me to our shareholders and to the markets that we have to, over time, through perhaps even several rounds of financing, raise upwards of 70 million euros, or about 80 plus million US dollars, to support PXT3003 and Charcot Marie-Tooth. And we will do that. So one way to raise the share price up is to fully finance the company, to fully enroll our clinical study, and show the markets that we're advancing on a critical timeline our studies towards approval. The delta between where we are today and where Pharnext will likely be should PXT3003 be approved and then be an effective therapy for patients with Charcot Marie-Tooth is a significant delta that we think brings value to the community, to patients, to their families, to caregivers, and also to shareholders and stakeholders. And so that's our mission right now, and we're going to focus on that, starting the trial, raising the funds to do so, advancing the medicine through the trial process and through the regulatory process as well.
Now, for the investors in the audience, what are the three biggest faced with this equity? And what are the three biggest opportunities?
Well, the three biggest opportunities is to see Pharnext, like a lot of companies in rare disease, really get an approved medicine that ultimately provides new therapy for patients and their families, and ultimately for shareholders brings enormous growth. And so, the question is, how do you reduce risk and advance opportunity? We think, as this is now phase 3, soon to begin the pivotal phase 3, we think that is one way to reduce risk, because we've had a successful phase 2. We've had an earlier promising phase 3 trial. We're not doing this new pivotal phase 3 blind. We're going into it understanding the patients, their concerns, the investigators, the trial sites, the patient groups, how the medicine works, the risks of the medicine, the potential benefit the medicine brings. And so I think risk is also being reduced that way. And then as we start the trial, the timelines become more defined. So risk is further reduced because people can start to look at the timelines and decide when is the right time to make an investment in our company, should that be their interest. And so, the opportunity is significant. We believe the risk is melting away. We hope to be transparent communicators about all these features as we advance our medicine and as we advance Pharnext.
Now, before we let you go today, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience here at Trial Site News?
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to speak today to your listeners on one hand, but I'm excited to tell the story about Pharnext, and in particular that patients with Charcot Marie-Tooth really have a medicine, I think, coming up that will help alleviate a lot of the distress of the disease. It's not insignificant in terms of the setbacks the disease has on activities of daily living, on patients' psyche. And we think that our medicine will be another important step to alleviate a lot of the suffering these patients experience. And therefore, I think, given that there's 100,000 patients in the US and the EU 5 countries, this is not insignificant. And we think it'll be an example of another successful rare disease company advancing to an approved medicine.
Well, Dr. Solomon, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yes, thanks for having me.